is Andre Cohen. He's a head of data science at Tilting Point, and he will tell us about the role of the data science in mobile games, especially big data. Yeah, so I'll give you a word now, Andre.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Yes, so the title, yes, big data in mobile games, and obviously as a publisher's perspective. So a little bit about myself, right? My name is Andre. I'm head of data sciences at Tilting Point, and I've been in the mobile gaming industry for about 10 years now. Originally, I started, making indie games when the iPhone just came out. Dived into making my own game with like a freemium economy, which obviously, had struggles, especially in optimization. And that's where, I spent a lot of time working on dynamic pricing and how to personalize game experiences. And last year, I started working at Tilting Point after being acquired, specifically focused on how to make games better and how to tie data together to make optimizations, right? And today, as I'm saying, the focus is how to connect all of it together. Big data in mobile games, who is this for, right? I think there's many different perspectives where this presentation might be interesting. As a developer, that's the side I'm very understanding of, is there's always constant opportunities to collect more data and make use of data. That's like the most interesting part of the whole thing. From a platform perspective, what kind of data do you give to your customers is really interesting, and how do you make that accessible, and where do you fit in the complete picture of gaming? It's often hard to understand like where you fit in, as having been a platform in the past. It's challenging. And finally, publishers. I think even if you're a developer, you're also a publisher, and if you're a publisher, well, then you know who you are. Is how do you tie both ends together? How do you tie the platform and the developer into one consistent platform for making decisions? And that's what this presentation is really about. The title I picked because you'll see why I picked it later, but the title itself is like a very old title from probably 10 years ago, when it was fashionable to talk about big data. And I cringe to this day when I hear the word big data, because I think we've changed a lot of our understandings of what big data is. So I'm not here to tell you about the terabytes of data that are being flooded into our systems or anyone else's systems, because that's frankly not how it works. I think by now, 10 years after big data became a thing, all developers have realized that there's no point in collecting terabytes of data about player behavior because no one uses it, and there's really no way to use it. Again, 10 years ago, when I was working in data already in mobile games, the whole thing that I was always talking about, well, finding, it's a needle in the haystack situation. Like, where is the knowledge or the little gold nugget of that's going to make your game better when you're covered in piles and piles of data that have no meaning. And I think we've moved away from this by now. And this presentation is a different perspective on what is big data. And I think, to me, big data means different bits of data that when you connect together, makes a very large picture of something that's actually very valuable. So no one piece is 5 terabytes a day of data. We're talking about a couple, megabytes of one piece of data here, a couple bit of insights over there. And when you put them all together, you get this very large picture. And just to explain where I'm coming from, right? Let's just take a game from Tilting Point. You have a game, and everyone understands, from especially the developer side, you get player data. Player data is lovely. You know about players' progression. It helps you understand what features to build, game design, optimizations that you can make. And that's the most concrete piece of data that gaming has. But then you have another layer. Like, if you think about it a little more, you have the live ops data. What are the A/B tests that you're running? What is the results of those tests? Offers, like how deep are you targeting and segmenting your offers? What is the success of messages, in-app messages, or push notifications? Where are they going, right? And how are they performing? These are all pieces of data, and they're connected to the player data, which is the interesting thing. They're not disconnected. There's a clear connection that is sometimes not trivial to make, but they're connected. And then you obviously have the platform, right? Everyone knows by now that you can't trust the analytics itself to understand how much money you have in the bank, right? That's the easiest way to think about platforms and who actually charges for the in-app purchases. You have platform insights also. Things like platforms tell you who's downloading your game. It's very anonymized, but it tells you a lot of things. It gives you even like crash information these days. Obviously, it tells you revenue on a daily basis and whatever the refunds, for instance. And that's probably the only true source of how much money you're making in a game. And finally, there's ASO as well. Like, how are you appearing in the search? How can you connect those players that download your game organically to the live ops and the messaging that you'll have during the player's time in the game? And how does that player perform that you acquired via organic downloads? But then you have more, right? Then you have UA. That's a whole other side of an organization of marketing the game, acquiring users. And again, you have the same problems. You have attribution. How does a player that you acquire for a high CPI differ from one that with a low CPI? And how should the messaging and live ops change? What should be the player journey? What the funnel is for converting those players? Organic players are very different from acquired users. And there's obviously a lot of optimizations that you can do, like bid optimization. But then there's yet another layer, right? There's the market layer, like benchmarking. How does my match 3 game or my cooking time management game compare to others in the industry? Am I doing above average, below average? What country should I be promoting this game in? What countries have performed well in the past? Like, why waste money in marketing in countries that are known to not enjoy cooking games, for instance? Or SpongeBob, what countries does SpongeBob simply not have a resonance with the audience? These are all things that you can take into account. And again, these are connected to UA, and there's a deep connection to platform and the live ops that you do and the player data. I would argue that the decisions, the data that you get in marketing in the market level should be connected all the way down to the player data, because there are some attributes that help you inform about live ops that you're doing, right? So in many ways, this is called the player journey, right? But this is the publisher's version of a player journey. Traditionally, player journeys, when I was doing live ops optimizations, it was just the player data and live ops. But I think by now in 2020, you can really associate player journeys as the whole journey of the whole player from the ideation of a game all the way down to the player's behavior. And there has to be a link in it, and this is what I'm going to be talking about. It's far beyond the player, and yes, I think the success of doing this, connecting these pieces of data together, is what allows you to gain an edge on the market, essentially, right? To not make as many mistakes and make better decisions when you have opportunities to do so. And I would even ask the audience, how connected is your data? And I'd be really interested to know where you think is the least connected, because that's actually probably the most interesting topic. So how do I approach this problem, and how does Tilting Point approach this problem? Is I think there's 2 funnels. We have the marketing funnel. This is the one for business development. How do you funnel market knowledge all the way down to a game and an execution of a game and the revenue that you generate from a game? And then you have the other one, which is the game design one. How do you funnel players that come from all sorts of walks of life around the world into something that's profitable and effective? And that's called growth. I mean, that's the way that the whole team exists, and that's where both things come together. That is the optimization of having cost per installs be less than LTV. And as you can see, there's a direct link between all the different parts of the player journey and these two funnels that you're always trying to optimize for. And at Tilting Point, we have three different, ways of thinking about this already, of connecting these. And it's a lot of data. I think the hard thing is how do you connect all of this together to make it effective? And 10 years ago, this was not as known, but it's really just called data engineering. At Tilting Point, for instance, we have more than 15 engineers working on the problem of how do you connect 180 different, data pulls daily from different services and different providers for different games into a single, consistent platform of data, right? In our situation, we use Airflow for scheduling all the pulls of data, because don't forget there's different service providers around the world and they provide data at different times, for instance. And then you have to orchestrate when you pull that data so that it's accurate. As a cloud, platform we use, or data lake, as they call it these days, we use Databricks. And that's where all their data gets combined into a single table that we can share across the whole company for decision making. And finally, it's Tableau and Looker that allow us to visualize these things and find the insights. And it's only if all of this pyramid of data is combined together does it work. But then we also have player data, right? It's the same situation. There has to be a live ops component. There is a game data analytics provider as well that we use often is Amplitude. And again, the challenge even for anyone is that there's a serious link between these two worlds. A simple example is ad revenue. How do you guys combine ad revenue with a specific player, right? So that you can make better decisions. These are very challenging things. And for us, we're constantly pulling data from LeanPlum about live ops and merging that data with all our market data and our platform data and moving it back to the player analytics Amplitude, so that the game side of the company can make decisions based on things that are not players connected. So the first, tool that always comes to mind is LTV. And Tilting Point has been doing this forever. And I think, there has been many different ways of thinking about it. And there's many valid ways of tackling this problem. My feeling is, it all starts with segmentation and how easily can you segment your player base. And this is not, rocket science. It's really a practical sense of understanding who your players are, and obviously then running multiple models. From everything I see, there's three things that you have to be doing for this to be successful. Predictive lifetime value, first of all, requires you to do it on a daily basis for every segment that you have. Even the segments that are not performing well or don't have sufficient data. One of the things that is really interesting about LTV is that you have to be flexible. I'll give you an example. If a game runs A/B tests, it changes the player's behavior, and that changes how they spend in the game. And how often have you changed your predictive LTV curves to accommodate those A/B tests? The ease of doing that is what distinguishes, a good LTV curve from a bad one. And finally, it's accessibility. Predictive LTV generates hundreds and hundreds of megabytes of data, and surfacing the right curves to the right people is the only way to make these useful. A completely other topic that Tilting Point spends a lot of time thinking about, and I spend a lot of thinking about, is the growth component, right? In those two funnel situations, there was the growth in the middle. And, it's how do you convert, predictive LTV to optimizing campaigns? And how do you optimize the creatives, especially going into next year where IDFA will be deprecated? Creative optimization becomes very important, because that is really how you can optimize your top of the funnel marketing. And all of this actually at Tilting Point, we call it DORA, but dynamically optimized revenue automation But it's really how much can we automate of this entire process. The LTV part is automated. Can we automate the bidding? And we do that for hundreds and hundreds of campaigns daily. And how can we make creative optimization faster? Because everyone has seen by now, I think, that you can change the color of a button and nothing else in an ad. And just the button changing creates a different click-through rate, right? Or it creates a different LTV curve for those cohorts of players. And if we try every permutation by hand, you're dealing with thousands of options of creatives, and it's very challenging. So one of the projects that we've been working on for the last year is automating these variants of ads, right? So when you start with creative with a couple of different assets, like a background, a main character, um, what is that journey of optimization that we can automate? Because we're dealing about just swapping different things, right? Colors of buttons, the call to action, the text, right? What is the video player, the footage that we play in the video for demoing the game, and automating this process based on testing the creative, seeing how people react to it, and then deciding if we should continue down that road of that creative or go back to a previous variant that was performing better, and eventually get to something completely different automatically without humans having to interact either with the bidding or with the art design to get better ads. I think this is the future of going forward, and improving conversions to a whole new level, aside from simply relying on Facebook or Google in their machine learning initiatives. And finally, the other project that I think encompasses this whole talk really is market insights. We discussed now, right, LTV, which is something very specific to the player behavior and the specific player journey inside the game. We've discussed this whole outside funnel of UA and growth, how we connect LTV to campaigns, right? Which is like, if you remember the SpongeBob slide, this is like we're like 2/3 into that design. And finally, there's market insight, which is how do you know what games to work with? What games do we build? What games are worth taking a chance at? Which ones have a chance in the future to perform well? And this is actually where all of our data gets combined. That it means that all third-party sources of data, right? We're talking about App Annie, Sensor Tower, Google Insights, Facebook Insights. How do we combine all of that data from all the games we have seen and the games that we see in the market or estimate based on like estimated downloads and revenue, et cetera? How do you combine all of that data into a system along with the game data that we have that's very accurate, right? So we know, for instance, at a tilting point, we know what cooking games perform. We know how match three games perform. We understand how horse racing games perform, although those are probably not something that happens every day that we have another horse racing game in our portfolio. But we have a lot of data points about different games, different personas, different target audiences. And finally, we have run thousands and thousands and thousands of UA tests and campaigns, official campaigns and large campaigns around the world for all these different games. And so when we're evaluating things and when we're making decisions, the power is really in combining all of this data into one database. And the combination of these three allow you to, first of all, benchmark how does my ad perform relative to other genres, right? With this data, it allows me to also know what kind of retention I should expect for a genre that I haven't played in yet or a game that I haven't designed yet. It allows us to figure out is this game possibly going to perform well and not well based on third-party data. All of these things get combined into one, and this is how we generate new ideas and how we evaluate our current performance by this, understanding and trying to understand better, because there is a feedback loop into this of can the game scale? Is this what we should be looking at or something different? So the road ahead. I mean, as I started this talk, right, I said, big data in mobile games was a talk from 10 years ago. It's a very outdated topic. And hopefully by now you see that there's a different interpretation that you can have to what big data is. And that is, it's more than just data, it's about connections. And what I've realized even in the last year at Tilting Point is that this ecosystem of data and connections is always changing, right? It can be anything from having to adapt A/B tests to LTV curves, which is something that happens on a daily basis, and having to react to those changes. But it's also changing providers of market data, right? App Annie, Sensor Tower. 10 years ago, Sensor Tower didn't exist. Today we have two very good providers. And also, there's always a new provider for new knowledge, right? Maybe it's some kind of, like Facebook platform and Facebook gaming, right? A new platform provides new data, and that data has to be merged into an existing system. And the final thing I hope that is the biggest takeaway is, the competitive advantage is about having this complete player journey, which extends far beyond just the game and the game developer. It extends into the growth element of the game, and it extends even further out into market insights. And tying data from market insights all the way down to the player level is where that is where the juice is. So with that, thanks, and I can happily answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It was very interesting. And I have a question for you. Maybe you have learned something interesting or maybe new about your player's behavior after collecting data. For example, some people prefer one thing, other people, depending, for example, on their age, prefer something else.
Exactly. There's a lot of corrections that happen all the time. And sometimes corrections are not, it depends who you're talking to. And that's actually what's interesting that I've seen is the I would go as far as to say the following. I think, for instance, LTV is something that, there's different ways of understanding it. Do you want to have an LTV curve that is highly precise, or do you want to have one that's really fast? And in many ways, it depends who your audience is, right? If you're looking at, finance, the iteration cycle is very different, right? They're looking at a 2-year LTV curve. If you're looking at UA, they're looking at a 7-day curve. And both of these people have very different insights on how to improve these curves, and we do iterations all the time. And it's funny to see how people prefer different things. Another thing that we do a lot, and we change a lot of the learning, is actually in the game insights. So we're always, like any publisher, I think, we see games all the time, and we say some games, nah, this game has no potential. Or from every data point that we have internally, there's no way this game is going to scale. And then 6 months later, we're proven wrong, and we see the game performing very well in the market, and we try to learn about what data point could we have picked up from this game that would have told us that this is a great game and we should go after this game. And those things are what we do, and we have lists and lists of rules about what are good games and bad games, and we keep updating these lists. And these lists are used then to train our models for finding other games in the market.
Thank you. And one more question. What is the benefit of using big data? For example, you have found out that balance is not correct and you have changed it, so more users started to choose this option, for example, and how it has influenced on the overall game process.
So I think the term big data is actually the challenging part, right? You need to be able to have the data to make informed decisions, right? And I think back, 10 years ago, the idea was we collect as much data as possible. And I myself was a person that did this all the time, in the sense that I once worked in a Farmville-like game where you could chop trees, and I decided that it would be good to know about every tree that was cut, which turned out to be billions and billions of trees a day by all the different players in the game. And yes, could we have used that big data to make decisions about game design? Yes. Was it practical? Absolutely not. We drowned in data. And I think that today, big data is about being very selective about what you're collecting. And I don't think it requires you to collect the same data every day, which goes back to what one of the last slides is being flexible and understanding that things are going to change almost daily. So in the sense of, optimizing the game and game design, I really think that it's important to be selective. Before creating an experiment, you set up the data that you want to collect, which might be a lot of data maybe for that experiment. But after that experiment is done, you don't need to keep collecting the same data. You can move on to the next thing. And that's something that we do all the time.
Yeah, thank you a lot for your answers. If you have any more questions for Andre, you can write him in private. And now we will finish. Unfortunately, we are limited in time. So thanks a lot again.
Thank you. Thank you for the time.